G'day and welcome to the Grow a Small Business Podcast. I'm your host, Troy Truen. Each week, we speak with an owner who has grown a business with 5 to 30 team members to something bigger. Diving into their numbers and unearthing the pain they've experienced, we explore what they did to overcome each barrier and what they would do differently from day one. Let's get into it. We'll have all the show notes and any resources mentioned in the cast on our website. Founded in 2008, their SaaS business is a toolkit for teachers in the classroom. At the start of COVID, tested a free trial and picked up an extra 500,000 additional students, with 10% of those converting to paid. Grown 40% in the last year, with international at an amazing 350% growth, and expanded from 18 to now 58 countries. Founded by two brothers, now FTE of 180, growing from a team of 110 18 months ago, and Alex started as CEO. Very profitable, gross profit over 80% and operating margin more than 30% on 30 million Australian dollar sales per annum. Funded by bootstrapping, then 3 years ago, the two brothers sold 80% to a private equity firm. Alex felt he'd succeeded when seeing continuous improvement in both his companies. Hardest thing about growing a small business is keeping your people together, keeping an aligned organisation and keeping focused on opportunities. What Alex would tell himself on day one of starting out is, every day is really different. You've got to get up and end today excited by tomorrow. In episode 26, hear how Mark started a website community from his bedroom in late 99 and sold 6 months later to a NASDAQ-listed company just before the tech wreck. 1 FTE to 15 and 3,000 active users to 3 million per month at the time of sale. Welcome everyone. Today I'm interviewing Alex Burke from Education Perfect. He's based in Queenstown, New Zealand. Thanks for your time today, Alex.
Thanks, Troy.
Beautiful part of the world there, Queenstown. I've spent a bit of time there skiing and bushwalking. Got some good friends over there in New Zealand, particularly in Queenstown. And you've just moved there recently, haven't you?
Yeah, so we were before that based in Sydney, sort of in between flying back from Singapore last year. So we were based in Singapore for about 4.5 years. Came back to Australia. Our investors are based in Australia, but the HQ of Education Perfect is based in Dunedin, which is in the South Island of New Zealand.
It's about 3.5 hour drive from Queenstown.
That's right. Yeah, so it's an opportunity for me to be a little bit closer to HQ, but as CEO, it doesn't really matter where I'm based, and I think from COVID that sort of was proved really to my investors that it doesn't really matter where I'm located, and so Queenstown was a good option. The fact that my wife is actually originally from this part of the world, so we can be near the grandparents for the first time in 9 years.
Get a bit of skiing too.
Bit of skiing, bit of boating. So yeah, kind of get that right work-life balance.
Great. Yeah. And let's start with how we know each other. Alana Fisher-Chesowski put me in touch with you and thought you'd be a great person to have on.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah, I met Alana probably over maybe 10, 12 years ago or so. We sort of stay connected mainly through sort of LinkedIn and through sort of, insights and thought leadership and the like. And more recently, I've been working with a business called The Big Smoke, which she's become associated with. And so she's been helping Education Perfect get her name out and sort of evangelize about what we're doing. And yeah, she felt like it would be a really good connection for us to have a little chat.
Yeah, great. And we're going to speak mainly about Education Perfect today, but you also had a previous business that you built up and sold off about 3 years ago. So near the end of this, there might be some examples you might throw into some of these questions, but it'd be great particularly to talk about that exit because not many business owners have gone through it, and they'd love to hear your pains and gains and what you do differently around that.
That's great. Sounds good. I've got a few grey hairs off the back of it. So,
so do I.
Happy to share some of those things.
So tell our audience a bit about your business, Education Perfect, what it does and how it makes money.
Yeah, so Education Perfect, it was founded 12 years ago. It's an online learning platform. Specifically, it's a toolkit for teachers, and it's a toolkit for teachers within the classroom. So that's how it developed out. I guess this year in particular, it's got more kind of global exposure with the fact that with distant learning, it's also very relevant from that.
Would have taken off with COVID, because I know here in Australia, a lot of schools were just scrambling and it was a pretty shitty experience for most parents that I've spoken with, different schools, different platforms.
Yeah, that's right. Our COVID experience, our journey started around the time of Chinese New Year. So that's when we first started to see Chinese schools actually were starting to get closed or get disrupted. And so we started to, we thought that was an opportunity actually to offer our product out for free for a short period. We then put that out globally. And so we had a trial that lasted till the 1st of May. And essentially we supported over 500,000 students over that time, in addition on that platform. So it's pretty significant and something we're pretty proud of. And then we managed to sort of convert about 10% additional revenue this year off the back of then those trialists. And so just to get you an idea kind of size of the organization, we've been growing year on year 40%. The international business for us, which only represents a few percent of the organization currently, is growing around 350%. So quite large growth, but obviously a much smaller growth, smaller base.
Is that mainly because of COVID though?
It's been accelerated, absolutely. We've jumped from 18 countries to 58 countries this year. What COVID did was really accelerate our marketing and sales plan. I mean, it got us open up to a number of schools, communities that might not have heard of us before. So for me, it accelerated probably by a couple of years in terms of our growth plan. But yeah, we're around 180 people now. So FTE. Of which around 110 based in New Zealand, and then the remainder are in Australia. We're also in Southeast Asia and the Middle East. So we have teams there, and they're very relevant to the schools that we're working with. We're very profitable, so we're over 30% operating margins. So we've got kind of good governance in the organisation. And the business has kind of grown organically, really, and it's funded itself in terms of its own growth and where we invest.
Great. And just closing out that growth, I guess 12 years ago when they started, so how many FTE did they have, and kind of what sparked the idea?
It just started off with two brothers initially, and they were learning languages at the time. They were studying at Otago University, which is one of the bigger universities in New Zealand, and they felt that technology could support their learning, and essentially through automation and repetition, they felt that technology could kind of help their learning of subject areas. And that really was the sort of the catalyst of the business. It's, we're now in terms of, size, we're a 30 million plus Australian company. As I say, sort of profitable and growing around 40% year on year. And the, resource wise, it's still, I mean, we're getting gross margins of over 80%. So we're still fairly efficient with our resourcing. And so
it's low marginal cost to add new customers, basically.
That's right. So we're a very traditional tech SaaS type business, which our churn is less than 5%.
That's great. Is that per month or per year? Per year.
Per year.
Wow, that's very impressive.
Per year. Where the way that we sell the product is through a yearly subscription, and that kind of runs with the school year. And that's very well accepted within the education sector. And what we do is we charge per student. So basically you go into a school and you have a per student model that we sell to. And I think the product is very, very well received. It's good. It's got good fit for purpose. In that respect, we have very strong customer advocates, and that's helped us kind of renew revenue year on year.
Yeah, great. Terrific. When was the moment you felt like you'd succeeded? And this may be either in Education Perfect now or your previous business.
Yeah, it's funny. Like, what is success? I've only ever worked in fast growth companies. Well, the last 13 years, I've always been in businesses that have every year, almost every month, change. And so for me, success kind of really relates to continuous improvement. And a business organization changing, whether that's sort of growth of new customers, new markets, or new operations or new things we bring into the business. And I think if I was in a business that maybe stood still for 6 months, then maybe I wouldn't feel like I've been successful. And so for me, I've just very naturally been driven around continuous improvement, and that for me then relates to a successful business, but also for me a business that keeps me interested as well, because it's always evolving and there's new challenges and there's new things that come up.
Yep, more grey hair to be made. Yes,
absolutely. Yeah,
and that's the next question. What does success look like to you? Do you have a different answer to that?
Well, I think there's different ways you can measure it. So I think I truly believe that from a business perspective, it's all down to your people and your culture and your employee engagement. So I think one metric of a successful organization is retained team that are feeling challenged every day and feeling like they're on the right kind of career path. So that's one. But I think from a business perspective, it comes down to sort of execution. Like there's a lot of people that talk about, strategies and the views of growing a business, but businesses are a results game. And around execution, I think you would look at things like, what is your revenue? What are your efficiencies or productivity gains that you've got in your organization? And what are your business metrics? What's the size of pipeline? Is that growing? What's your size of customer base? Is that growing? And all those sort of elements really are where you should be viewed as being, successful, I think.
Yeah, that ties into one of my favorite quotes, Thomas Edison, vision without execution is hallucination.
Yeah, I think more and more, actually, it's really interesting. I think when you're operating in an organization, whatever level you are, you've got to be good at execution. And I think what's interesting, even if you're bringing in senior, or even you're bringing the most junior person into the business, there is a mentality around execution that you need, and being able to sort of deliver and really push things through. And that's something that I think is critical, actually, around how you sort of develop out teams.
Yeah. And number one thing you'd recommend to marketing a fast-growing business?
Well, I think 100% you've got to obsess over your customer, which is, it is the cliche comment, but without a doubt, you can't underestimate the power of being customer centric. And kind of trying to understand your customer, understand their buying behavior, and kind of how your product or your service offering fits that. So that feels really important. Yep.
And do you use the Net Promoter Score to measure customer loyalty or engagement, I guess?
Yeah, we do. We use kind of a multiple methods of metrics around trying to get feedback as much as possible. For us, it's feedback from teachers, it's from students, it's from parents. So we've got various different people that we're trying to gain information from. We do use NPS. So for our Australia New Zealand product, we had 67.
That's very impressive. Just for the audience, it's a positive 67. It's not a percentage. I wrote a blog post about how to calculate it on our website if you have a look through there. But that's very impressive, Alex.
It's like Google, isn't it, like sort of Google and those guys are sort of 40, 50% or something.
Yeah, it's hard to get over 50 positive, and then anything 60 or 70 or above is phenomenal, particularly if you can hold on to that and it's consistent. It's a great measure. One question between 0 and 10, how likely are you to refer us to a friend or a colleague? The audience may have heard it. A lot of big companies use it, Amazon, Telstra here in Australia, and small companies as well, obviously, and Bain & Co., who recently just bought Virgin Australia, actually. They created it in the 90s. It's a really, really simple and I think powerful measurement.
Yeah, what's interesting for us actually is, so we have, I guess, our ANZ school product, and that's, as I say, we got a 67 score. We have a fairly newer product where we're going out into international schools, and whilst our platform is a really good fit, we're not an entire fit currently around curriculars. So if you think you build something for the Australia curriculum, or even the New South Wales curriculum, or wherever you might be, in international, you have various. You have Common Core, which is a US. You have Cambridge IGCSE, which is a UK related one. And so there's a little bit more sort of broader considerations of where you fit. And we did an NPS score there, and we got a positive 27.
Yeah. Okay. Yep.
So we're not as high now. It's very early days, and those are also customers that we've probably brought on this year. So very, very early days in their sort of experience of the platform, and not just the platform, but the experience of our service offering and everything that we provide. So maybe because they're not strong advocates just yet, you get a lower score. But, you know, back to the point around business metrics, I mean, that's it's a great thing to kind of work from, and it's a great thing, I think, to build from.
Yes. Yeah. And what about funding the business growth? You know, 12 years ago, did they start out with any investment?
No, so the organisation's been bootstrapped since day one, and the brothers who set up the business, ran it as a very tight ship. Again, obsessing over the customer and changing the product to make it work, and then build a customer base off the back of that. 3 years ago, they then sold out. Mm-hmm. And they kept a 10% share each in the business, and they sold to private equity. So two organizations came in, a company called 5V and a company called Malfa, who took kind of majority share in the organization. And then, you know, since then, really, that PE firm, they're obviously focused around high growth. They've been looking at, bringing in the right team and the right management. So they ultimately brought me in. I was connected. They were actually one of the PE firms that previously looked at my old company. Mm-hmm. So I had some connection there. So they've kind of brought in, I guess, the ability to bring in talent, and just bring a bit more sort of governance and board governance into the organization. Yeah. But again, the funding though of the organization to date has all been through its own margin and its own cash flow.
Yeah, great. If you were to start up today with plenty of funding, would you go into your industry?
Well, it's interesting. If I had I've never been in an environment where I've been given any money. So my previous business, Tigerspike, had zero cash for the whole time and was bootstrapped and had to manage the business.
What did that business do, Tigerspike?
It was a digital services tech company. Mm-hmm. So services, so not product, SaaS, as Education Perfect is. So slightly different model. Definitely more cash flow constrained than my one now. But I think if I had unlimited funds, I find the tech sector around health medicine is interesting.
Definitely.
And also the sustainability area. Is there a way of, growing a profitable company and operating a profitable company that sort of fits in that space? Mm-hmm. That would be really interesting.
Yeah. And can you outline the most stressful point in your small business growth journey so our audience can learn from it?
I think the biggest thing is people and the managing people and managing expectations and the challenges of growing, because what you get in any business at kind of all levels and all steps, and there's all these advice around, hey, when you get to 10 people or 50 people or 100 people or 200 people, and my last business, we got to 500 people, and there's different, moments and stages within organizations. And probably the hardest thing is managing that kind of level of, in the early days, I think you need generalists and entrepreneurs within an organization who can kind of have many hats. And then as you grow, you do have to bring in more governance.
Yeah. And
absolutely.
Yeah.
And that balance of how you continue to grow, but kind of have that level of governance is a really tricky balance.
Yes.
And in some respects for me, people wise, that's been really hard because I've had to make some really tough decisions throughout my career. And when you're a leader and a CEO, it's a lonely job.
Yeah, it is.
And in that respect, it's hard in terms of trying to get the right balance for the stage that you're at as a business. And I think without a doubt, that's been the biggest stress.
Yeah.
That and paying your tax bill.
Yeah. No, I agree with that. Moving people on, whether they're team members or business partners or even investors or shareholders, it's the most stressful thing that I've dealt with in my 21 years in small business. But unfortunately, it's there. It's a bullet point on your job description as the CEO or the leader of the business. But yeah, very, very important. And I think you've just made a good point there. I've certainly experienced this in a few companies where the business is growing so fast and it reaches a point, it's gotten bigger and more complex and has different needs to what the early people in the business were, and often they can't keep up with that change and what the business then needs. And then I've found that really difficult to identify and quickly enough that actually, you know what, this person, we need to move them around the organisation somewhere else, or they need to stay at that level. They can't be promoted up because their skills just don't match what the business needs in the next chapter.
Yeah, and that's where you need, your rigor around your performance management, clear accountability and roles and responsibilities. That can be, a real challenge. And also, I think it goes down to style of management as well. Like, I've worked with various individuals, founders and the like, who are kind of a bit all over the place, right? And kind of make noise. And in some respects, for them, making a noise and making it busy means that we're doing things.
Yep.
And
that's not necessarily productive or effective.
No, and my style of management is I've always been a fairly calm, level person, and I will, absolutely get excited about lots of things, but I generally keep quite a balanced view, really think about our focus and kind of execute well on stuff. And so in that respect, it's sometimes a more calm approach. And then sometimes when you're dealing with people that maybe are more kind of, well, we've got to be scattergun and crazy for us to be really performing, they find that very difficult if you're kind of coming in and there's a calm team. It's like, well, hang on a minute. If we've got a calm team, how can we execute? And actually, a calm team, if you've got the right laser focus, can often outperform and push beyond that.
Yeah, absolutely. Have you read Jim Collins' Built to Last?
Yeah.
Yeah, it's a great book, and they talk about, it was a 5-year study, 21 amazing companies like Disney and Boeing, and they each had a comparison company, as you know, and they went into that wanting to know what made the difference between them and their comparison companies, because the comparison companies outperformed their stock exchange over 50 years like tenfold anyway, and these brilliant companies outperformed the comparison companies even further. And they wanted to know, why was that? Was it a charismatic leader? Was it an amazing strategy or a brilliant product? And it was none of that. I won't give it away for those that are listening, but it certainly has got a lot to do with the people and also the leadership style. It's not the charismatic, very talkative, visionary leader that executes and delivers a big growth return like these companies have. So
sometimes it's those quiet achievers that sort of end up actually sort of delivering stuff in the background.
Yeah, absolutely. I think it's those people obviously have a place in the organisation. Usually it's in the sales area. So I think it is, moving them into the right part of the organisation and getting the more effective, what's been borne out, particularly in the Jim Collins, both his books, that it's the more level-headed, quieter leaders that tend to deliver more results.
I guess it goes back to your point around that sort of balance between strategy and execution. I think in this respect, absolutely, you need people to sort of bounce ideas and really push the business. But smart founders and owners of organizations, if they don't have that execution bone in a body, they very quickly get individuals like that into their business to help sort of give the organization a good grounding.
Absolutely. I've got a good friend of a tech company actually here in Hobart who sacked himself as CEO. He's one of the founders. At the start of the year, late last year, wrote his job description up for the new calendar year 2020, this is all before COVID, and looked at it and didn't like 80% of what needed to be done and realised it's also not his skills and sacked himself effectively. He's now heading up product, and they've got an awesome kick-ass CEO in that's better suited for their next chapter of growth. And back to that point on job descriptions, I've been in awe with some companies I've worked with that get to a reasonable size, 20 or 30 people, and I say, right, let me have a look at your job descriptions and your org chart, and they just stare at me and say, what's a job description? I don't have any of those things in place, and it's a critically fundamental part of supporting growth.
Yeah, I think you realise more and more with that as you go in your career, around having clear roles, responsibilities, accountability. Sometimes I think in the earlier days, it's almost that's a distraction. Like, why do we need that? We can all just muck in and do stuff.
Yep.
But what you find though is it's very hard to manage teams like that. And manage expectations and allowing people the right focus.
Yes.
And what you find if you don't have those job descriptions is that you can lose focus very quickly.
Yep.
And that can be very dangerous when you're a small business, because if you don't have the right level of focus, then that can be where it's the difference between being a great business and a kind of another statistic of a mediocre small business. Yeah,
that's right. Yeah, there's a great example in Michael Gerber's book, The E-Myth, which I'm sure you've read. It's a great book, but he talks about that, having job descriptions and an org chart particularly, so it's clear on who's responsible for what, rather than everyone being responsible for everything and running around and bumping into each other and falling over, like I like to say. So very, very important. What area in business do you feel you've had to work on the most to add the greatest value?
So I found this in my last organisation. I did exactly the same in this organisation. So in my previous business, I became CEO for the last 6 years of my time. That was 11 years there. And the first thing I did was put pen to paper. I got the team to write down a set of values and kind of a mission and something that was sort of a grounding of the company. And in my previous company, we started out at Sydney in Australia, and we ended up with 12 offices around the world.
Yep.
And when I came in, there were businesses going in all different directions because there was nothing to sort of bring the business back to a set culture. I did exactly the same with Education Perfect. So when I came in, there wasn't a mission, there wasn't a set of values. And we started with that. And then we looked at and linking that to brand and culture. And ultimately, with anything, people is the most important thing, and you need that team culture, but you need that stake in the ground, because if you don't have that stake in the ground, no one kind of understands where the history was, right? Because everyone has their own interpretation, and you almost get that sort of, Chinese whispers where someone realizes this and say, oh, it used to be like this, and this is why we went in this direction. But if you set something, a grounding, I think that really helps you set really the foundation for fast growth.
Yeah, I agree totally. That actually came out of the Built to Last book, the Jim Collins book, early 90s, I think it came out. And that really brought to the fore the value of having a vision, a mission, core values. And there's a lot of great examples in that book. And what have you enjoyed least about managing the fast growth?
I think, cash flow was always a worry in my last business. Yeah. And I think when you're bootstrapped, it's difficult. And you have to kind of set very strong criteria around, pay tax person first, pay your staff second, and then third your suppliers in that order.
Yep.
And sometimes that's very difficult when you've got, good connections with suppliers and you don't have that cash flow. Unfortunately, they're third in line. You can't play your suppliers first if you haven't played your tax person. So I think cash has always been a constant worry and a concern. I guess the other component of being in an early smaller business is just getting yourself known and getting yourself respected in market. And you're going to get lots of naysayers, and that can be really hard work. And you've got to really work at building your brand, building your profile in market.
Yep. And what do you love most about growing a small business?
Oh, absolutely, constant change and the opportunities that it comes from, and the different people you connect with, and every day is different, and I love that. And I think it would be really, as I pointed to earlier, I think it would almost be strange if I was in an organisation that wasn't ever evolving and growing. I think that would be really.
I think we're change junkies, business owners. Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely.
And what's been the biggest mindset shift for you in your small business growth journey?
I think for me, I started in TV production. That was where my career started. And really, since a very early age, I've always been into storytelling. And I always kind of viewed business as quite fun, because I could be a storyteller in terms of team, or what I'm doing from in the early days was producing a television program. And I think the realization to me that storytelling rings true really now, and is super important, and it's super important how you craft one, communication to investors or whatever you have associated with you. It's really important that connection is right, with your leadership, with your customer experience, and kind of how you connect with customers and suppliers and all that sort of experience. And that really is all down to how you craft your communication, craft your processes, and storytelling really is a big piece of that.
Yeah. And what's the number one habit you think a small business owner needs to develop and maintain?
I think you've got to be obsessed over quality. I've always felt that you could go into any industry. Every industry is very competitive. And there's some really great insights actually around brand. You look at different brands, right, and commodity brands and why they differentiate themselves. And I think if you can obsess over quality and deliver a better product or a better service or a better brand, and it's perceived as a better brand, you're going to be successful. And that does take, it's not simple. It does take a lot of work, and often it's the hard work in the background that really pays off. But I think if you can obsess over quality and reputation, that's ultimately going to put you in the best position. You think there's 4 coffee shops in one street, and you've got the best quality product, the best service offering, you're probably the one that's going to survive COVID.
Yeah, good point. Find it hard to define a clear strategy, then communicate it and execute it alongside the rest of your team? Or you currently don't work a simple quarterly strategic plan to boost your team's performance? Our Business Growth Formula online course is perfect for small business owners with 5 to 30 team members wanting to grow. We share the mindsets, habits and tools to be a legendary leader in your business. growsmallbusiness.com. And can you talk to how you added people to the team, some wins, mistakes and advice for those listening?
Yeah, I think for now, for me, I came into an organization where when I joined, there was about 110 in the organization, about a year and a half ago. So we've had quite a fast growth since I've been in the business. And I also adopted a management team who had been already in the company. So for me, it was really trying to identify my skill gaps or experience gaps. So for example, we had a bit of a technology gap. So we were on the hunt for a really strong, experienced CTO into the organization. We had a gap around product and digital marketing, which was something that the previous business hadn't really focused on much. And so again, bringing in that right experience. And, if you can find the right person in the right experience, that can really elevate everyone else. Yeah. And I've got some fantastic people in my team, but they only know what they know. And bringing people that can kind of inject some additional experience or some additional skills just helps to lift the bar for the whole organization.
Totally agree. And that's really well summed up again by Jim Collins' Built to Last book. There's a quote in there which is often more succinctly put as, people aren't your greatest asset, the right people are. Get the right people on the bus, the wrong people off the bus. And I feel this is really an important point, the right people in the right seats. Because you may have great people on the team with a great attitude, but if you're not playing to their strengths, they're not in the right role, you're leaving value on the table for the business.
Yeah, that's right. And you also then, around that, you need good KPIs and measures within your business to allow you to effectively change it if it's not working. Yep. And that's why it's important to state what your culture and value is as well. Yep. Because if someone isn't a cultural fit, you can ultimately point to it and say, look, hey, you're not meeting the values that we have, so you're not right for the business. Yeah. And bringing people in that are not the right cultural fit will really hurt you as an organization. Definitely. And it's really, really important that you get those traits within your organization.
Yeah. That takes us on to the next question. What are some things you recommend to building a sustainable and kick-ass culture to help with the growth?
Well, I think, as I stated before, putting pen to paper. So being really clear on what your mission is and your values. I think that's really important to have something to point to, stick it in the front room as you come in, or the front part of the office or wherever you are. That's super important. The other thing though, it's funny, but I've realized this now in both my last organizations, you need to get good swag. So, and what I mean by that is you need like a good t-shirt. So I've got this t-shirt. This is the new EP brand t-shirt.
Right.
You want to find a t-shirt that people would wear at the weekend.
They're
So
proud of it.
It's not corporate, but something a bit more sort of casual, smart casual in some ways. But if you can get people to wear that t-shirt,
there's a lot.
It's incredible. It really is. And there's power in it of getting everyone to wear the t-shirt and feel an identity with your organization. So I found that, in the most humorous way, that's almost the best way of bringing people together is a good t-shirt.
Yeah. And tell our audience how you've handled balance. And this is not an opportunity to brag about now living in one of the most beautiful parts of the world where you can go snow skiing and boating and mountain bike riding all the time.
Yeah, my work-life balance. So I'm an early riser. I wasn't used to be, actually. I grew up in London. I was a late riser, and then I moved to Australia 16, 17 years ago, and I just got used to the great mornings, and so was up every morning. So I'm an early rise and early to bed. So that's important. And then for me, it's the walk and talks. So I've always worked in open plan offices over the years, and so I had to find a way of talking to the team where it wasn't like me closing the door and having to kind of go, okay, now we're going to have an official confidential conversation. If you go for a walk and talk with someone, you can shoot your breath. You could talk about all sorts of topics quite openly. And the outside air is good and helps you think, etc. So I probably walk 20,000 steps minimum a day.
Yeah, great.
And I'd often do a lot of my video calls and updates with people on the phone whilst walking around the areas. And that for me absolutely is a work-life balance tick.
Yeah, no, that's very, very good. I do most of my calls like that as well, either cleaning the house or on a bushwalk.
And because you don't need to be sitting behind a camera all the time, particularly if there's people in your team that you know pretty well. In that respect, you can be out, you can have a bit of a general chat, but you can still, get through all the bullet points, get through all the specific areas that you need to chat to. And I think kind of having almost an open, expansive environment, whatever that might be, right? You might be in a rural area, you might be in the mountains, you might be in a big city, but it just inspires you to sort of think a little bit differently and sort of think in other areas and it's being healthy at the same time.
How much professional development have you invested in yourself over your business career?
I have to say, fairly limited. I've always been a good networker and I've always talked to a lot of people. And I think my own professional development really is building out my own network and working within a business. And, I'd say I've had a good career. I've worked really hard and I've grown and evolved through my experiences. And I think a lot of those experiences have helped guide my path. And have naturally been my own product development. I also, just in terms of the way that my mind works, I typically need to sort of see things or hear things, and I retain that. And so when I'm talking to people in a network, I might get a bit of advice here and there, and often I might, retain that or query whether that's different for my own thinking and kind of come up with something then going forward from there.
Yeah, we all learn differently. Some like to read, others like to listen, others like to talk. Yeah. And what about mentors or coaches? Have you had any along the way?
No, I've had different people along the way and different people that I talk to. I mean, from a family perspective, my father and mother have been good mentors to me over the years and still are in terms of certain things that I might soundboard. And then there's various different people that I've met through my career who have kind of given me advice or pointers about particular challenges or whatever. I don't necessarily have a set, framework in mind when I'm approaching those individuals, but they're people that I trust. And most things I do, I'd always soundboard a group of people, sleep on things, percolate ideas. And, I work quickly. And I'll soundboard across people quickly, but I need that planning time. I wouldn't just jump and go, we should do this. I need that 24 hours to sort of sense check things, have a night to sleep on it, and then execute off the back of that.
Well, let's talk a bit about a board of directors. Assume you've got one on there at the moment.
Yeah, so we've got, I have 6 board members in
And
my group.
And you report into the board. You don't sit on the board.
Well, so that's recently changed. So I do now have a board seat.
Yeah.
So I am on my board, and in my previous business, I had a board seat as well.
Mm-hmm.
And I effectively report into the board as well. So on the board, I have the 2 founders, and I have my 2 investors as well.
Yep. Great. And do you have a chair on that board?
No.
Okay. Well, let's talk about the exiting your last business. I think the audience would love to hear any lessons there, what you do differently, and any words of wisdom.
Yeah, so I exited the business in 2017. I mean, this could be a whole 15-hour conversation, Troy.
Yeah.
I think probably key bits and pieces were, we were always, for many, many years, kind of out in market and talking about our business. And the reason why that's important is that you need to build trust with external parties. So when you're talking about numbers or product strategy or whatever it might be, most people will kind of go, oh, when they hear it for the first time, they'll be great. Thanks, Troy. It's a great strategy, great vision. But what they'll do is they'll write down the number that you say.
Yeah.
And you go back 12 months time.
If you haven't hit it,
then they won't be interested in you. But
you lose all credibility. Yeah.
So if you can build some trust, 100%, I would highly recommend that. So that would be number one.
Mm-hmm. That's saying, under promise and over deliver is so important, particularly when you're talking with investors or a board, if you're reporting into a board.
Absolutely. Yeah. And you need to, and it's hard because you're trying to oversell yourself, right?
Yeah.
And so it's really, really important though, you build trust with future investors, and you're talking with businesses, get them on your story, on your journey. And then when you're ready to make an exit, you would have built enough trust for, businesses to want to invest in you, which, can be sort of significant dollars. So it's not a straightforward process. It's definitely a relationship that you need to build over time. So that's number one. Number two, we had one failed run with a big organization. It fell over at the final weekend.
As in they were about to buy the business or invest?
About to sign an SPA, so shareholders purchase agreement. So very, very close. That was a lot of learning around what not to do. But I think when you go to exit, you've got to realize a few things. One is that you need a really good think about the narrative around the organization and a narrative about the different parts of your organization as well.
Yep.
And then you need to think about the fact that most processes are probably going to take about 6 months in terms of, reality of how long things take, even if advisors and other might have a, particular date in mind, must be end of year, must be 1st of September. It does take a little while. The second thing is once you agree, you always have then, cooling down periods. You have the due diligence period, which can be anything from 30 to 90 days.
Yep.
And you'll constantly be able to justify the numbers that you put in front of people. So you've got to have confidence really around a 12-month runway.
Yep. And
where people will get caught out is if, you're 6 months in, you're about to do a deal, but your numbers aren't quite right, they could step away. And until an SPA is signed, they could step away like the minute before an SPA is signed. And even during due diligence as well, you still got to then hit your numbers and, through sort of whatever periods you've set up for that. Yep. So having that sort of narrative is really, really important.
Out of interest, did you have an earn-out component of the payout, and did you have to stick around for a year or two?
No, so the previous business, my founders and sort of associated shareholders, etc., all exited on day one.
Yep.
I was the only individual that stuck around, and we had a short sort of earn-out, which was essentially around sort of 90 days was the period.
Yep.
And that was just the way that the arrangement worked. Whereas all the shareholders, we had a number of investors as well, were all sort of taken out immediately. And then I stuck around. I sold to a US public listed business, and I was really, keen to learn from that experience, sit in their leadership team, kind of understand how they worked, positive and negatives of that experience.
Yeah.
But it was an interesting place for me to sort of work through, how those businesses operate, how they report, and what they consider important at a $1 billion business versus a $100 million business.
I really like the way you framed that, which is you saw a learning opportunity here, a rare window there to dive into and get a lot of experience in something that a lot of people will never be able to access. That's great. So how long did you stick around for?
So I was there for about a year and a half.
Yep, great. And how did the... Okay, sorry.
No, then I was sort of start to explore opportunities, and that's when I sort of stumbled across Education Perfect.
Yeah, great. So it took a little bit of time off in between and waited for the right opportunity.
No, I didn't take any time off. I just did a bit of a jump from the other one, but I was just at a point where I was keen to kind of try something a little bit new. I'd been in my old business for 11 years in total, which is a really good innings. I felt it was a great opportunity for them to bring someone else new into the organization to give it that extra lift.
Yep.
I've given the business a lot of my time over the years, and I was really interested in a new challenge, and I had a couple of opportunities, one in fintech and one in edtech, and I just felt that the edtech area was something where I could contribute and add value to, really, and so that's why I picked it.
And the exit, how did it come about? Was it an internal decision, or you got approached externally?
We were so the decision was internal. So we wanted to exit. Some of the original founders had been in it a little bit longer than me, and had already sort of been outside of the operation of the business for a number of years. So 3 of the founders were sort of outside of that for the last maybe 2-3 years.
Yep.
So I think they felt like they earned the right to kind of have an exit. And so, absolutely it was something that we were focused on. And for me, like going through an exit, I focused on that for 6 months flat straight. And it was a distraction. I had to focus on it. And, the analogy I sort of provide is like you're carrying a vase, a really expensive vase, and you can't drop it at any point through that process, because it's really hard to get people to sort of buy into your strategy, the vision, how the business was operating. So it was a real big journey.
So from the moment of the decision we want to exit, how long did it then take until you finally got an signed agreement?
Well, it would be over 2 years, because we came close to an exit a few years before that. So we were probably on a journey of around 2 to 3 years.
Yeah. Any other bits of final advice on your exit experience you can share with those listening that may be considering it themselves?
I think when considering an exit, it's really, it will feel like early days, but I think it's really important to decide when to take on funding, or if ever to take funding. Because I think when you're a very small business, there's no shortage of people that could invest a few $100,000 in an organization. And as sort of founders, you've got to remember that as soon as you start to dilute your shareholding, you lose control. Mm-hmm. And so I'd always be very wary of that, particularly because there's so much you can do from government. So in the tech space, there's so many R&D grants and other kind of tax incentives that mitigate the need to necessarily take some cash on. Mm-hmm. And I really think founders have got to explore the government and trade organizations more, because you get their support. Grants can be up to $1 million cost or more. And so that can really help fund a lot of your growth. And then later down the track, if you've got to a certain level and you own a significant share in the business, then an exit of $10 million and you own a majority of the organization is a significant life-changing experience for you. If you take heaps of investors on and you have to get to 100 million to get something similar, it's a different journey, and that's worth thinking about.
Yeah, when I come across people that are what I call equity precious, I don't want to give away any. I need to own the whole thing 100%. I just throw them a Chinese proverb, which is, it's better to have the tail of an elephant than the body of an ant. All right, Alex, one of our final 5 questions. What do you think is the hardest thing in growing a small business?
What is the hardest thing growing a small business? I think it's just keeping your people together, keeping an aligned organisation, and keeping focus on the opportunities.
Yep. Favourite business book, which has helped you the most?
There's a few. So I loved Emotional Intelligence. This was 20 odd years ago. I thought it was a really interesting book for me around, the sort of the EQ of organizations, and kind of realizing that, I wasn't the smartest kid in the room by a long shot when it comes to school and university, but I was always focused around relationships and was always a good people person. Yep. And that spoke to that. I think Good to Great as well was a really, more recent, very popular book, but it's
for us mere mortals. That's the book after Built to Last, which was looking at Disney and Boeing. But his second book, Good to Great, is how do you you've already got a good company, how do you elevate it to that greatness level? Yeah, it's a phenomenal
Exactly. Book. And what are the tiny, and it's those small little differences that count.
Yeah. Any great podcasts or online learning tools apart from your own you would use for your own professional development?
Yeah, so I do. I've got a reasonable network of individuals now that sort of share me, good podcast articles on LinkedIn, etc. I found Future Learn is quite good in terms of courses, short courses for businesses. And there was one recently that got pointed out to me, a company called Reforge,
right,
who do growth courses out the US.
Yep.
There was one kind of ex-growth guy out of HubSpot and a few other businesses. Great. And those courses look really good and really strong for professional development.
Yep. One tool you'd recommend to help grow a small business?
You've got to have a good CRM. And you've got to have a real mindset around maintaining good data about who your customers are, how you're interacting with them, the relationships that you're building, the connections you make. Because that's your organization is all about the relationships that you have, and you don't want to sort of forget about those later down the track. And that's why, good kind of governance around CRM, I think, is really important.
And which one would you recommend? Salesforce, HubSpot, Zendesk?
I've used all of them.
There's a lot. I think
you just have to, there is a lot. You just don't overcomplicate it.
Yeah.
And don't try and think about your organization and how you want to run and then pick the best tool for that. Yep. So we're currently using HubSpot. I've used Salesforce before. I've used NetSuite before. They all have kind of different capabilities, but the baseline though is almost the science and the thinking and the mindset behind it.
Yeah, good advice. Finally, my favorite question: what would you tell yourself on day one of starting out?
Well, I think, every day is really different, and, you got to get up. I love for value in my old business, which I brought into the new business, which is end today, excited by tomorrow.
Great.
And it's all linked to kind of resilience, starting fresh, everything's onwards and upwards, continuous learning, you're all on a journey. And so I think that's really important. Each day you've got a different opportunity to deliver a great result.
Great. Well, thanks for your time today, Alex. I think the audience will get a shitload of value out of what you shared with us. 2 businesses there we've spoken about, and both having phenomenal growth and success. So congratulations to yourself and also the wider team. And thanks once again.
Thanks, Troy.
And for our audience, we would greatly appreciate a review in iTunes or whatever platform you listen to us on. More reviews means we bubble up higher in iTunes, etc. So more business owners looking for podcast help with their growth will find us.